You know, I have to feel, it's best if I feel I'm doing some good or I have a cause that I can go further with the story, you know what I mean? You know, you need to go through a steel wall, you know? You need to feel nobody can stop you. You know, if it's just a job, it's easy to compromise. Yeah, maybe, yeah, yeah. I also want to get paid though, which a lot of Arthouse Cinema doesn't get paid, you know what I mean? That's why I admire Ken Loach so much, because he keeps doing it. And he only gets paid a little amount, but he's been able to make lots of movies, you know?
But it doesn't exclude being paid, you know. If you take, for example, Stanley Kubrick, he was not a poor man, I wouldn't say that. He was paid that he did really Arthouse Cinema. I think that we, very often we do as Arthouse Cinema would say poor cinema, which shouldn't be the case, you know.
No, I suppose not. But Kubrick was unique, you know. I mean, he didn't do studio stuff. He did his own stuff. He told the same story over and over. He only had one story.
What was his story?
His story was the mother doesn't protect you from the father. The father was a domineering killer, and Mammy won't protect you. Sometimes. It's a variation on that all the time. That's The Shining. But then the spaceship is like the mothership won't protect you, and the man has to be born again without the help of the mother. He dismantles the computer, Hal. But originally Hal was a woman's voice, and he had to revoice it. So he revoiced it for a male voice. But it's very interesting. Like, I describe 2001 basically as baptism. Like, the kid's born and you take the child away from the mother and you baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. No women involved. So 2001 is just, I can become a star child, but I don't really need the spaceship. I don't, like, it's the womb, isn't it, the spaceship in 2001. And he goes out on the umbilical cord and the mother sees him and he comes back in and dismantles her brain. Well, I think essentially there was no visual culture in Ireland, and what there was in the church, you know, stations of the cross, stained glass windows. We didn't have the weather for outdoor painting much. It was an upper class profession in essence. It was centred in the Royal Academy in London. There were exceptions like William Butler Yeats's brother, who was a painter. But by and large, we really didn't have a visual tradition. I always compare it to the royal family were jealous of the Duke of Norfolk, and so they imposed a limitation on glass on windows and chimneys because they couldn't be outdone. And so they put a limit on her. They put a huge fine if you had windows or chimneys. So the Irish peasants boarded up the windows and put a slate on the chimney. So the room got full of smoke. They lived in smoke-filled rooms with reality out the door. And it's always been the way I think about Irish people, the way they see. It comes from finance. And when I made the first movie I made, somebody wanted me to get a silk t-shirt, you know? Mm-hmm. And I was like, what's silk? And I realized I didn't really know what silk was. I never bought anything silk. And then I realized my mother used to go shopping, but she didn't have money, so we couldn't afford it. So therefore, because you can't afford to see, you don't see. It's very rare that somebody can see who can't afford to see what they're seeing. So they kind of repress, or they have a negative attitude to wealth and fineries and paintings and anything that's not in their possessory title, you know. So they kind of get intimidated by visuals, you know. And visuals were often intended to intimidate them, like courts, churches, priest house. You know. And so symbols and costumes were something that they didn't like. So I come from that tradition. It's kind of like the anti-authority kind of place. So I'd say that a lot of my stuff was kind of verbally based. And me and Neil Jordan, I think, are the first two Irish filmmakers who come out of the break with the past from the oral tradition into the film tradition, which was because of TV, because of the BBC, because of British television. But you know, I suppose you're asking me about the narrative. A lot of our narratives are basically very conservative, based on Ibsen, based on 3-act structure, based on a well-made play. And it's funny that, like, when I went to college, it was the opposite. It was like Sam Beckett and Ionesco and Theatre of the Absurd. But that was after people had been through nuclear war and been past the structure, that the 3-act structure couldn't accommodate literature. But cinema has never really gone there. Maybe sometimes in Scorsese you get a feeling of it, but you don't really. You know, popular cinema is very conservative in its structure, you know. Like, I think Dollhouse, it's a very funny movie, but I think I built that house that it's shot in, and it's on the sea, and it costs a lot of money, and I don't think Kirsten liked the house. I think she had an aggressive attitude towards the house. She didn't really like it. It was like, this is not where I'm from. So it's kind of almost like a protest movie at the house itself. It's like a house that she wants to turn everything upside down in. It's me becoming maybe inauthentic to her, I don't know. But that's what I felt.
You felt that as a father.
Yeah.
You felt that as a father, and this is the truth as a father and as a Jim Sheridan director. I mean, this is all of the norm. But she found a purely cinematographical solution for that conflict, which is obvious, you know. We knew, all of us knew that.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, she gave herself terrible limitations of just shooting a movie in a house and having no script. So she just made it up as she went along, which I'd be scared to do. It's very feminist. It's very feminist movie, you know, very women oriented. The weird thing about it is there's a conflict between the working class kids and the middle class kids in the movie, and although the working class kids are very good actors, probably better than the middle class kids in lots of ways, it was the middle class kids who became stars out of the movie because they're good looking, they're calm, they're not angry, you know. So the public, I think the public liked their anger with a very pretty face, you know. So there's a lot of things in the movie. It's interesting, you know. It's a very interesting movie. I'd like to see her do something with a script now, you know. She's visually very good. Like, I think the first movie she ever made was great. It was about an autistic child, you know, and it was like based on her. It was based on somebody she knew, but also Fran's brother was disabled, and she was really interested in that side of the story. Yeah, and I wrote In America with her and Naomi, but not much in the same room. I let them write their thing, and then I took it and wrote mine. Oh, I think the legal system is set up to protect the upper classes. I think there's no law whatsoever in Ireland. I think it's a zero. It's a total zero. The people who put the Irish people on the line for billions will not get any. In fact, they'll be rewarded with $8 million payments, and a kid robbing in a shop will be sent to prison. And the law in Ireland is the maximum fine that the Law Society, a self-regulating society, imposes on any law firm, the biggest law firm, the highest they can be fined is €3,000. And they charge €600 an hour. So that's 5 hours work. So they've got it before lunchtime. So they can make a decision to say, yes, it's legal for somebody to do something completely illegal and cost the Irish people 30 billion, and they can get fined $3,000. And it's not surprising. Now, I don't know if it's the same people, but back in the day, these people who, let's just take a statement that back in the day, the same people founded a bank, and the bank was called HSBC. And HSBC was essentially founded at the time of the opium trade. So HSBC was involved, I'm not saying they ran the opium trade, but involved. So a year ago or 2 years ago, HSBC were fined $1 billion by America for money laundering for the drug cartels. Now, are you telling me that HSBC got out of the drug trade, which started in China in 1840s, the opium trade, which was industrialized by the East India Company? So they industrialized drugs in 1840, at the same time as the Irish famine was happening. So you have situations where these firms, these ingrown, indeveloped situations of self-protection, like, there's a law in Ireland, like, let me give you another thing with the law. If a person who's poor or middle class inherits a will, the legal in Ireland can keep that in probate for 10 years. And my friend who's a judge, and one of the High Court judges of Ireland, when he addresses his class, he asks people, when is probate over of a will? And they all give different answers. And he says, no, you're all wrong. Probate is over when there's no money left in the will. That's their attitude. So their attitude is pariahs on the society. And it's a joke. All the wigs, the whole thing, all the white shirts, the whole thing is a fucking visual joke. And all the papers is bullshit. It's all corrupt to the core. So is the banking system, so is all these systems are corrupt. And Ireland, so long as they're bailed out by whoever, Germany or Europe, it won't be addressed. It just won't be addressed. And so we're living in a world of madness, of, you know, hard to know what's going to happen, but it doesn't feel like anybody in Ireland is really angry about any of this, you know. So, like, you know, you can have an attitude like, let's take the Guildford Four, and let's take the fact that you're dealing with terrorism or freedom fighters, but let's take even the situation, which I think it is, that they started out as young children, young boys, teenagers, freedom fighters, troublemakers, whatever they are, and you've turned them into terrorists. Let's take it's that. And now they're terrorists, right? But let's take, I don't agree with that, but let's say they are. And you're the authorities. And you know that this man here actually did the bombing. And this man here maybe didn't, but he's innocent. Now, when the case gets to a certain position, if you convict him and people start protesting, what you're doing is all the people protesting are advertisements for the fact that you shouldn't help the terrorists, because even if you're innocent you go to jail. So there's no value in putting guilty people in prison in that situation. When you get to extremes, you're much better putting the innocent in prison. You're much better convicting the innocent. So it gets to be a complex arrangement where we get back to where Greek tragedy started, with the scapegoat. So the scapegoat is a necessary condition of the human condition. So when Jesus says, you know, this my body, this my blood, he's saying, I'll be the self-accepting scapegoat for the sins. But he's hiding primal, horrible stuff of sacrifice of animals and humans when he says, this my body, this my blood, do this in memory of me. But civilization is a very thin veneer. And that's what I'm always trying to get, that I'm actually for the civilization, for the ice that won't crack. But I think we're all skating on very thin ice now. Well, the Lockerbie thing makes you kind of go, I was just investigating Lockerbie, and yesterday the Daily Telegraph suddenly discovered that the Iranians did the bombing at the same time as the Americans are trying to do a deal with the Iranians. So you're trying to figure out what's actually going on. Justice is just a part of a pawn game, you know. It's not real, you know. And like, it's kind of like, you know, if you're one of the many millions, you're in trouble, and if you're one of the elite, you're not, because they usually get off us, from what I see, you know. So it's kind of, you point these things out, but you're not necessarily believing you're going to change anything, you know. And in our country, when the trouble started, I actually think it was incumbent on the British to kind of not treat it as a training ground for modern warfare, which is what I think they did, you know. And everybody has their different problems, each country, you know, and each nation have weaknesses, you know. The Irish's weakness is living in a fantasy world, in a narrative that doesn't make sense, you know. So, you know, I know a lot of filmmakers say, you know, do a dream, my movie is a dream, and I go, yeah, but what if the audience are living in a dream? What if they're living in a place that's a dream, which is a false dream? You know, if a kid, I suspect if a kid is arrested on the streets of Paris, that in French he will say, I want my rights. But he doesn't have any in France, I don't think. Certainly in England or Ireland he doesn't. Your rights is an American condition. But because we watch American movies all the time, we think we live in America.
Do you think it is still a British rule?
In where?
In everywhere.
British?
Yeah.
No, I think a lot of it is American rule, but I think there's a conflict between the American system and the British system in lots of ways. I think the American system in general is better. In general. But, you know, I suppose to move, like, I don't think the duty of, the left wing always wanted me to get the police who are guilty in the name of the Father. Where I wasn't about getting the guilty, I was about protecting the innocent. I don't care. Who's guilty, I don't care. You know, guilty is like, whatever, that's your job. You know, but like the filmmaker's job is not. I don't know if our job is to be a judge and jury, you know. Well, yeah, but if you go back to Greek theatre, it's Lysistrata you're talking about, isn't it? You know, so Lysistrata is the women refusing to have sex with the men unless they stop the war. But that's one side of it, but the other side of it is the woman who kills her children because her husband's unfaithful. Medea. So Medea is the other side.
Exactly.
I'm saying most women are Lysistrata, but there's also Medea.
Yeah,
and it's
strong female.
and I've met that Medea a few times,
Oh.
And you want to be careful of her. And I'm just saying that when the women are extreme, they're more extreme than the men. That's the actual.
Margaret Thatcher is a perfect example.
Yeah. Yeah, Margaret Thatcher's a perfect example, yeah. A Looney Tunes nut, you know, who you know, is very interesting but nutty probably, you know. Yeah, she seems like, but the ones I'm talking about were like women who just, spiritually they have to believe that if they killed all the people in the name of God, and if they stopped the war, then they were doing it in the name of something else which they can't accept. So they have to keep going with the war even to their own destruction.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, but you know, politics is just war by another means. It's war without weapons. So I think the Irish weren't able to have the two-faced nature of politics. I think they find it difficult to deal with being two-faced, you know. They're kind of addicted to their victimhood, and to people will believe that, even though I think a lot of the IRA would believe that the English think they're right but just won't say it, you know. Whereas that's not the truth. The English just don't, a lot of them just don't care. It's not about that. It's about power and containment.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Million.
Lovely to meet you.